Hello, and welcome to the second episode of SenseCheck by FundSense, the podcast series where we'll be breaking down key regulatory, operational, and industry developments affecting asset managers, and hopefully giving you practical insights on how to navigate them. This is still very new, and we're really excited to be launching this series and hope it will become a regular go-to resource for anyone dealing with fund reporting, disclosure, or indeed any asset management operations. I'm Jamie Keane, founder of FundSense, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tatiana Gordeeva, Senior Director of Business Development at our partners, Toppan Digital Language. Welcome, Tatiana.
Hi, Jamie. I'm lovely to be here and be part of the second episode on your podcast. I'll introduce myself. As Jamie mentioned, I am at TDL. And although my current role is of a strategic sort of commercial nature, I have about 15 years worth of operational experience in the industry, both hands-on project work and also leading teams servicing world's top asset managers. So yeah, very excited to be here and have that discussion.
We're delighted to have you here, and we thought it's good timing because as we're fresh from our breakfast briefing with asset managers in London last week, where we discussed some of the many challenges and the solutions around prospectus creation and maintenance, we thought it would be a good idea to discuss that in a bit more detail today. Now, something we realised, Tatiana, when our firms first started working together is that there's a lot of synergy between what we do as an automation platform for asset managers and what you do as a specialist translator in this industry. And actually, when it comes to prospectuses, it makes a lot of sense also to have legal input as well. So I should mention that we were joined at the briefing last week by Antoine Portelonge from legal firm Arendt and Medenac, who provided great insights. I think there's a lot of overlap in where the challenges and the impact of the challenges lie from a legal perspective. I think we were both nodding along with everything Antoine was saying about his experiences with prospectuses, supplements, annexes, and the translation side as well. So when we meet with a new firm, we typically will start by having them walk us through their current processes. And we find that even that is often a challenge for them, as it's rarely documented end to end. But there are obviously a number of common themes that we always see, and that's that processes are manual, they're time consuming. They, of course, involve elements of Word, SharePoint, emails, Excel, and so on at various points, with different people, different stakeholders dipping in and out, and with multiple silos existing both within the firm and with third-party involvement. And this just makes governance, collaboration, good communication really difficult, if not even impossible. Now, as Antoine highlighted last week, you guys, the translators, will typically get involved towards the end of these processes, but do you still experience all of these inefficiencies?
Yes, I would agree with that. And in fact, when we're looking at inefficiencies when it comes to translation, I think they're sort of twofold. So when we look at processes, so what happens, how things are done, and content or content format. So process-related efficiency gains could be achieved through just perhaps minor tweaks in even the way information is shared, just what you mentioned before. It could be minor or major, depending on the current setup, but it does help. And then really also any preparation work that can be done in advance, just because there's so little time left for actual translation towards the end. Anything that's related to, I don't know, terminology change that a client is aware of in advance. Say there's a merger and all the fund names and share classes will need to be revamped. This can all be done in advance to allow more time for actual linguistic effort in the end when the file's ready. And then last here, the format related. So yeah, sometimes we see scenarios where editable machine-readable format is not available. So we do need to prepare a file first. So extract that content, which takes time before any linguistic steps even occur. It does carry extra time and costs, and it is not of any particular value. So yeah, I'd say these are my top efficiency areas that could be improved.
No, thank you. That makes sense, and it's interesting. I think you mentioned a few times there time. Given the criticality of translations, I think the fact that it, I guess by definition, has to happen at the end, but it's so important, and yet because everything else is so inefficient and is taking so much time, it's almost something that that's rushed at the end, or there is an expectation of that very fast turnaround. So I think what's clear is that if the whole process is that bit much more efficient, everything becomes quicker, and there's a bit more breathing room at the end. Something else that was also clear from Antoine is that the processes, from a lawyer's perspective as well, is also slow. They see the same fragmentation, the same challenges. Is this something you were aware of from your interactions with legal firms for prospectuses, or indeed any legal translations? And if so, how do you help with that?
Yeah, again, completely valid point, and I think we would have been more involved in that and kind of exposed to it with long-standing customers, where you sort of become part of that entire content cycle, and so you are dealing with the various stakeholders, internal and external to a client. Um, this sometimes can result in various last-minute changes depending on the sequence of revision steps at various parties. It can also result in a situation where perhaps either a client or a lawyer or us as a language service provider discovers a discrepancy that probably dates back a few versions, which triggers another review and kind of further shortens that time. So yeah, again, I think trying to improve process and put any safeguards in place is essential, really. So each time we try and iterate the process and make things as painless as possible, given the restrictions.
Yes, yeah, I see. I think it's interesting. So I've mentioned, and I know we've talked a lot about it, the silos that exist within firms, but also across the wider prospectus maintenance or prospectus creation process. Firms often tend to deal with firms like mine from a technical perspective, the legal firm and the translation firms in isolation. And I think what we'll start to discuss more through this podcast is why it makes sense to bring us guys together, to bring them into one process. It just makes the efficiency, the governance much more effective. Another thing that I think we all agreed on last week was that lawyers are not going to stop using Word and track changes anytime soon. And to be clear, that despite FundSense rallying against the inefficient use of Microsoft tools all the time, this actually isn't one of those times. I think I was saying last week, we try to use the if it ain't broke philosophy. And to be honest, word track changes works really well. So we see it as our job to bring this use into the wider workflow and governance processes. So, for example, bringing any changes in a document and showing them as tracked changes, or vice versa. So extracting just the changes that have been tracked for review by the right people at the right time. As you will know very well, these documents can be very, very long, well over 1,000 pages sometimes. So the ability to be able to break it down into manageable pieces is really important. And this brings us on really to what firms can do to improve the overall processes for prospectuses. Can we start by looking a bit into your thoughts from a translation perspective, how things can be made better?
Yeah, I think a few things could be looked at here. And in general, I always sort of believe that giving your current processes a critical view from time to time is always a good idea. Just because things have been done in a certain way for years does not mean they can't be improved. And even some incremental changes can over time yield very good results. Aside from that, as you mentioned, track changes and all of that, that brings me to the sort of the key aspect of maintaining version control, especially if things are not automated. So the more automated and sort of human error proof it is, the better, especially when it comes to filing of your foreign language copy and providing your linguistic team with a final approved copy is quite essential so that they can use it later as a base for subsequent updates. So there are no discrepancies and no inconsistencies found a few versions down the line. And lastly, I'd say here there is a similarly very simple but quite effective step of if possible, involving your localization partner early in the planning of your prospectus update. It can allow a bit more time to think of perhaps a change of workflow, or depending on the extent of changes, consider what else needs to be put in place. And even just giving heads up to your linguistic team is always quite good practice to eliminate any risks unnecessarily.
Absolutely. I was nodding along or throughout that, but particularly at one point, you said it more articulately than I will now, but along the lines of just because something is right today doesn't mean it's going to be right in future. So I think a critical thing is, as you said, to review these processes, but also have systems in place that allow for these changes to be made, to allow for ongoing process improvement. So yeah, we see that as really critical on the FundSense side as well. I guess from our perspective, we see our role in this to work with you as the translation agency and any other third parties to make sure the flow of information is seamless and the whole process, not just the elements controlled by the asset manager. So that would include obviously translations, third party legal and so on, to ensure that that input is subject to the same governance, same SLAs and so on. Our view, I suppose, perhaps quite obviously, is that firms really need an overarching system to maintain all of this. So something with very strong customizable workflow capabilities. You mentioned workflow. We think that's absolutely critical. Now that can be something that's built or something that's bought. I have my own thoughts on that, but I'll save that for another podcast. But the key is that the processes that can be automated should be, and control should be in place to make things as efficient as possible. Now, as you know, I could talk for hours on this. I won't today, I promise you. But the main things the system needs to do, as well as automating manual tasks, is things like maximizing efficiency by incorporating all the business rules and data rules, ensuring things don't need to be rekeyed, don't need to be copied and pasted. All the data goes to the right places at the right time. It's got to incorporate all user roles. So again, internal users and external stakeholders can do and see exactly what they need to see, when they need to see it. And perhaps most critically, certainly for people with compliance hats on, all audit trails to be able to keep on top of exactly what has happened at every stage. And as we know, there are a lot of stages involved in these processes. That's useful during the processes as they're in play, so people know exactly what's going on, what they need to do, what they need to oversee. But also, if God forbid, the regulator comes knocking down the line and you need to find out exactly what happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago, you can see exactly what's happened, who did it, why they did it, which is another challenge that you will often find with Excel or Word. It's one thing being able to track the changes, but to see why things have been done, that's not always so easy. And something else you mentioned as well, versioning. All document versions should be there. They're all stored within a repository so that these can all be looked back on if need be. I said I wouldn't talk for ages on it. I have, but I'll stop there. I think it'd be much more interesting to hear from you, your perspective. How does automation help with the whole translation process?
Yeah, I think automation brings great benefits for the actual translation flow. So at various stages, preparation, actual linguistic steps, and then completion. So you have quality assurance, terminology management, consistency checks, number checks, and all of the essential steps there to really make sure that the outcome is of good quality, consistent, and compliant. However, all of those would work so much better if the initial document is created in an automated manner, in a machine-readable format. So really, it lends itself much better to applying various translation technologies and AI and the likes. So really, it's the combination of both, especially now that we can benefit from automation from before translation and after. We should look at it upstream to make sure that further down the line it's is as of high quality as expected.
Indeed, yes. And you mentioned a few key things there. So obviously, technology is critical in everything we're talking about. You referenced AI. So clearly, the machines are becoming more and more involved in these processes, and that was something else that we discussed last week and is discussed in more and more of our meetings, and I'm sure yours as well. Where are machines involved, but critically, where is human intervention still required? I think we all agreed it absolutely was a prerequisite for these kinds of solutions, these kind of processes. And my answer is, of course, the most obvious parts are the what we call the human intelligence that are involved with the legal side, and of course the translation side. So at Toppan, how exactly is it that humans are involved from a translation perspective?
Yeah, I agree with you that despite all of the available improvements and advances in technology, you still need to have still expert SMEs in the field to make sure that everything is managed really well. So here you are talking about obviously linguists, but they need to be coordinated by very, very experienced, knowledgeable project managers who are aware why a customer is creating these documents, what the deadlines mean to them. Sometimes, as we know, speed and quality are kind of on the same footing there in a sense. And also, there is a whole army of supporting functions that help make all of this happen. So there is engineering team. If, as you mentioned, 1,000-page prospectus in Word suddenly is not behaving the way you expect, something is broken, and you do need someone very experienced who can fix it quickly so that your work is not lost and you're not late for your delivery. There's also quality team who are also looking after the various processes, that everything is controlled, that we adhere to the audit standards that we undergo every year. So you really need to make sure that your language services provider, the humans that are managing and orchestrating all of this, are of the best quality, and really look at it from your interest in mind.
No, I completely agree. Now, obviously, we're both technology firms, and on the FundSense side, we say, I guess, AI in particular as an increasingly important technology, but very much to complement this human involvement, not to replace it. And so we're getting towards the end now. I think where we finished last week was what are the steps or the first steps really asset managers should take to address the multitude of issues around prospectus processes. And my recommendation with the starting point was that they shouldn't be afraid to start. I think one of the main reasons we see so many inefficient processes surviving is that it just seems like too big a task to start changing them. But with a combination of a good platform and coming back to the people, with good people who understand the problems you're trying to solve, we think it doesn't need to be that huge daunting challenge at all. We always say to clients, potential clients, start by mapping out the processes and look not just how you do things today, because that's the way you have to do it, but look at how you would do them in an ideal, more efficient, faster, even more enjoyable world. It sounds silly, but we do know that people in product teams, data teams, legal, and so on hate the very manual data entry, copy and pasting, data checking tasks. They'd rather be focused on value add activity. So a good system can actually be win-win in that regard. And then in this new world, look at who does what, who needs to do what, the roles, the ownership, the reviews, the sign off, etc. And when that needs to be done. So, for example, look at where tasks can run in parallel. People can doing things at the same time, particularly now that the document has been broken down into manageable pieces, rather than everybody having to act sequentially. Another thing we always say, don't look at the project in isolation. If processes could be streamlined better by involving the legal firm and the translators, then do so. And I know from talking to you and Antoine that translators and legal firms are very happy to find more efficient ways to work with the asset manager. So last question, what would be your advice to firms looking to either automate translation services or even switch to a more efficient translation provider?
Yeah, I would say I would definitely agree with you that, you need to look at your process by breaking down at which step things perhaps could work a bit better, where you see most problems and where you could see ultimately more efficiencies. And I think also try and if an asset manager don't have localization expertise in-house, go to your language services provider or providers and get them to talk to you about any innovation available after all those years, just to see what their take is on your current process, a bit of a consultation, I guess, approach, and try and find out whether there are any areas indeed that can be addressed immediately, long-term perspective as well. So I think these are the most sensible places to start. And I guess lastly, just to see what you would like. Let's say you're localizing a number of languages at the moment. Would you like to do more, but there are certain constraints because of all those different overheads that you're already dealing with? Again, see if this is what you want to achieve and if it's possible with your supplier or with elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think that's probably a good place to leave it. Clearly, there's a lot that can be improved across the whole prospectus process, but there are solutions out there. And if you're going to outsource, make sure you look to integrate all third parties into a single streamlined process where possible. Can't leave without a quick plug. If you'd like to talk to us about how FundSense or Toppan can help with prospectuses or any multi-language processes, please do get in touch. Tatiana, huge thank you for joining me today.
For having me, Jamie, pleasure.
Hopefully you'll be a guest again in the future, but for now, this has been SenseCheck by FundSense. See you next time.
That brings us to the end of this episode of SenseCheck by FundSense. If you found it useful, subscribe to stay up to date with the regulatory and operational changes shaping asset management. Thanks for listening. Please join us for the next episode of SenseCheck, coming soon.